Hello, good morning everybody, or good afternoon, and welcome to IPI's World Congress and its debate on Turkey, entitled Turkey's Journalism Outlives the Suppression, looking ahead to Turkey's 2023 Centenary. Just before handing over to Mark Lowen, our moderator, and the panelists, I'd just like to say on behalf of IPI how pleased we are to be able to host this panel. My name's Oliver Moneycurl, and I've had the good fortune to be responsible for IPI's work in Turkey for the past 12 months. The most of this credit should probably go to my colleague Renan Akivas, who has worked tirelessly for the campaign and is currently working behind the scenes to make sure that this all goes smoothly over the next hour. IPI has worked intensively in Turkey over the past decade, and not least since the most recent media crackdown following the failed coup of July 2016. At its height, the repression saw up to 170 journalists in jail, several hundred media closed, and thousands of journalists forced out of work. Prosecutions were launched against prominent and critical journalists that also saw the jailing of IPI's Turkey chair and board member Kadri Gu, who's with us today, who is behind bars for some 12 months and only received his full acquittal at the end of last year. IPI responded to this crackdown with its Free Turkey Journalists program and has sought to promote journalists' rights, monitor trials of journalists and campaign for their release, organise solidarity and advocacy campaigns with IPI members across the world. We sought to press the international community, the European Union and member states in particular, to support independent journalism in the country. We've organised a number of high-profile international missions, meeting with the Constitutional Court and Supreme Court and the Ministries of Justice. And more recently, we've sought to rebuild the capacity of IPI's National Committee to enable it to give voice to its members and to map out a strategy of their own and a vision of how Turkey's journalists will look in years to come. All of this work is available on IPI's Free Turkey Journalist Campaign site. I expect the link to that will be available in the chat quite soon if it's not already there. Lastly, I'd just like to thank all of you in the IPI network that have engaged with and supported our work in Turkey. It is through the strength and reputation of IPI's members that we are able to have an effective voice in the support of oppressed journalists. So thank you for that. And with that, I will hand you over to Mark Lowen. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Oliver, and hello to you all. Thank you so much for asking me to moderate this panel. It's a real pleasure to do this, not least because it reminds me of how much I miss Turkey and the great work of all you fantastic journalists and lovers and appreciators of good journalism and freedom of the press, which is of course under severe threat in Turkey now. I spent 5 years there as the BBC News correspondent between 2014 and 2019, an extremely turbulent time, a time when I applied for the job. One editor in London said to me, "Oh, Turkey slightly struggles to get on air." And then I arrived in September 2014 and the whole place began to explode in many different ways, which I hope was not my fault for arriving there, but simply the fact that Turkey is an incredibly important place, and the work that everybody does as journalists is exceptionally important. So it's a pleasure for me to welcome you to this 69th annual Congress of the IPI, and it's indeed its first virtual one. And you are all here because you are appreciative and supporting this global network of journalists, editors, and publishers that the International Press Institute represents. Eğer Türkiye'desiniz, herkese merhabalar, hoş geldiniz. Affedersiniz Türkçem için. Before we go to today's session, let me just queue up tomorrow's session as well, because tomorrow at 5 p.m. Central European Time, that is 6 p.m. Turkey time, there is a session called Fake News, Whose Problem Is It Anyway? And then the following hour, one entitled The New Authoritarians, and you can register for those sessions with the same link that you've used for today. So please do tune in for the following sessions as well, which takes us seamlessly to today's session, which, as Oliver has mentioned, is entitled "How Turkey's Journalism Outlives the Suppression, Looking Ahead to Turkey's 2023 Centenary." Now, for those of you who don't know, 2023 is the centenary of the foundation of the modern Turkish Republic. It's an incredibly important moment for President Erdogan, incredibly important moment for Turkey as a whole, of course, but for President Erdogan as well, who has seen it as his kind of goal to stay in power and effectively become perhaps the second longest or second most influential leader of the Turkish Republic after Ataturk. But in order to achieve that, he has employed new methods to increase the control over the media and clamp down on the opposition. And before we move to our panel, I would just simply say, in my experience, you need two things to be a Turkish journalist these days: a thick skin and a good lawyer. We all know that Turkey's record on press freedom is pretty appalling and very sad. It is the world's largest jailer of journalists. Reporters Without Borders places it 154th of 180 in the Press Freedom Index, nestled just between Belarus and Rwanda. There are, according to the IPI, 77 journalists in prison and 170 media outlets forcibly closed since 2016. So, in today's panel, we will be taking questions from all of you out there listening into this. You can post your questions by clicking on the Q&A button on this presentation or in the chat. They will appear, we will be notified of them, and I will put them to our panel, which takes me on to our wonderful panelists. I will do a little brief introduction for all of them. We are joined today by Kadri Gu, who has a long and distinguished journalistic career, of course, most recently at Milliyet and then at Cumhuriyet. He was imprisoned as a columnist for Cumhuriyet in 2016 for 11 months on spurious charges of links to terror groups. Indeed no charges, I should say, not spurious charges. He is now an executive board member of IPI and chair of IPI's Turkish National Committee. Nevs Mengu, a distinguished TV reporter and anchor, notably for CNN Turk, when she was forced to resign after commenting about the length of President Erdogan's meeting with Donald Trump. 23 minutes, which was, of course, the truthful representation of the meeting, but that didn't go down well among government supporters. She now mainly works for Duvar and Deutsche Welle Turkish. İpek Yezdani, who has a long and illustrious journalistic career from the UK to Turkey, most recently with Hürriyet, what was the most influential centrist newspaper in Turkey before it was taken over recently. She was working there for 9 years. She was fired in November 2019, along with 40 or so other journalists. İpek, maybe you'll just tell us how you found out that you were fired from Hürriyet.
First of all, I would like to say I'm so proud to be a member of this international network, International Press Institute, and it's a pleasure for me to be on the same panel with you, Mark, and with the other distinguished journalists here. Yes, how I am fired from Hürriyet is quite a funny story, but it's only funny now. It was not funny back then. Just around 1 year ago, I was at the news meeting at the newspaper's office, and my mother was keeping calling me when I was at the meeting. And I know that my mother always calls me now and then because she wonders about how I'm doing. And I was telling my mom, please don't call me because I'm in the news meeting right now. And at last, she was so insistent. She called me like several times and I had to hang up the phone. And she said, İpek, you are fired. And I was like, what are you talking about? Like, how can you know that I'm fired? Apparently, when I was at the news gathering meeting at the newspaper office, media owner, the owner of Hürriyet, they have sent a written legal notification to my home and to the homes of other 45 journalists who were fired at the same time with me, in order to let us know that we were laid off, we were dismissed. But since nobody has talked about this with us, nobody has mentioned that we are not working for Hürriyet anymore, we were at that day still at the news meeting and working at the office. And
so it was your mother who fired you.
Exactly. I might be the first journalist in Turkish history who was fired by her mother.
Well, I can tell you that I'm sure my mother has dreamt of firing me on several occasions. And fourthly, and lastly, but certainly not leastly, Aylin Sener, we're delighted to have you as well on the panel, who is that rare breed, someone who actually wants to become a Turkish journalist. She is studying communication at Galatasaray University, and she is freelancing for the fact-checking website, invaluable website these days, teyit.org, and represents the future and indeed the hope of Turkish journalism. So thank you all for being on this panel. We're delighted to have you. And we will start coming to the questions that are being posted in the chat and in the Q&A boxes. So please do keep asking your questions to all our panelists. And over the next hour, we will hope to get through as many of those questions as we can as we ask our illustrious panelists how to get through the suppression and oppression of the Turkish media environment in the run-up to 2023. But maybe I can just start off by asking you all briefly, if you would, to lay out really, in your views, where do you see the Turkish media heading, the Turkish media landscape heading, as we move forward in the run-up to this 2023 anniversary, indeed over the next few years? Kadri, maybe I could start with you. Where do you see the Turkish media landscape heading?
Well, now the whole industry is controlled by the government, by cronies or by proxies of the government, I have to say. So the media industry, as it is controlled by the government, only some, small independent outlets, one or two independent TV channels, or digital media outlets, which I don't, it's not necessary to mention names right now, do practice independent journalism as we know it. But I want to, put my approach, have my approach on a individual basis, personal basis, I want to dwell on the human capital of independent journalism, because it starts with persons, with individuals, with journalism, with journalists willing to remain journalists. So how journalism would survive in Turkey? The question has an answer in persons, actually. We know that journalism thrives only in democracies. However, it can survive under authoritarian regimes. So this survivability has some prerequisites. And my answer to how good journalism can survive, first, as a prerequisite, we need good journalists. But it's not enough to have good journalists in a country like Turkey. We have to have a definition of a good journalist. A good journalist is independent, honest, and professional. However, to survive under duress and political pressure, such qualities would not be enough to survive, because a journalist, independent, honest, or professional, can be deformed under pressure. So we need more qualities. I'm asking myself, and I have some answers. move forward with some answers. What is the meaning of taking the risks of being jailed by the oppressor, or of being persecuted, or having the risk of losing your job, as many among us have lost already, as the minimum price that we pay to let people be fairly and objectively informed so they can make their mind freely to make sound decisions in a democratic setting, which is able to bring healthy electoral changes accordingly. It's a long sentence, but I don't have a simple answer, or maybe a short, simple answer to that question. I think it is meaningless, because journalism thrives only in democracies, and, there is a meaninglessness in this regard. You don't go to jail just, for the sake of people to be informed, okay? So there must be other reasons. I have to, answer my, question in this regard very shortly. So a good journalist must have a strong character, must be in love with journalism. So being in love is not being in love is not stupidity, but maybe craziness. It may be some. And third, a good journalist must have the will for fighting for survival.
Well,
you've
all clearly fought for survival in many ways as journalists, and of course you all have your strong characters and you all have your honest journalism, and yet it seems that you are in the minority in many ways. I mean, and you are certainly, you've been pushed down by the government in Turkey. Nevs, just tell me, in your view, what prospects are there for Turkish journalism? Kadri there talked about what is needed for journalism and how for journalists to survive. In your view, how can Turkish journalism, impartial, proper, honest journalism, survive in this landscape in Turkey at the moment?
I can give you an example from myself. As you were saying in the introduction part, like I was let go from CNN Turk, and what did I do afterwards? So afterwards, actually, I was pretty lucky because I got to meet people from Deutsche Welle, that's German state TV, and they were enlarging their operation in Turkey. So I started doing a weekly show online for Deutsche Welle Turkish. So I was pretty lucky because I was able to find a job right after CNN Turk. Most of my colleagues are not as lucky as me. I worked with Deutsche Welle for a few years, which had been really useful for me because it's an international organization, network. At the end of the day, I got to learn a lot. About Germany, so it had been a really good experience for myself. But as I said, I was lucky. If I was not employed by Deutsche Welle, then what would I do? I would try to survive maybe on YouTube, on independent, smaller organizations. But it's not easy because you cannot financially survive, basically. Because yes, you can basically, even producing news is something expensive, it's not cheap. It's not just, okay, you can have your camera and just you can talk to the camera like most of us do and have been doing in this period. Most of us have our own YouTube channels. And what basically people do is they just sit and comment on their own YouTube channels because that's the cheapest thing you can do. You can just follow the news all day long. You can read, you can talk to your sources, on the phone, gather information, and tell your viewers about this. This is a way to do journalism, but just a way. But if you want to produce serious news on the field, that's expensive, but it's impossible in this situation. What journalists have been doing, we have been using these international funds and EU funds, and actually I got to understand in this period how important EU was for Turkey, or how important all these international organizations that people these days, look down on, you know, people are looking down on all these, I don't know, EU organizations or UN organizations. They're like, oh, they're useless. You know, this is what people say. But actually, I got to understand they are not useless at all. If such organizations did not exist in Turkey, let me tell you, Turkish people wouldn't be able to get any news at all. Because now normal news are on social media in Turkey. So it's like a vice versa situation. For example, you know, you have, say, Alex Jones in the United States, right? Like a crazy preacher guy. So he used to be on the TV, but then he went mad and he went crazier and crazier, and now he's on YouTube. He has his own YouTube channel. Or I don't know, like German viewers don't understand. Attila Hildmann, he's on YouTube, he's not on TV. It's vice versa situation in Turkey. Like normal people or normal journalists are on YouTube, crazy preachers are on TV these days in Turkey. So this is the situation. But like, this is how you survive with international funds, with EU funds, basically. That's how it is. And that's how, but the thing is, how effective social media in Turkey. For example, I have my own YouTube channel. I do like every day at 5 or 6, I do my own little thing. I have between like 50,000 to 20,000 viewers, quite stable, but that's about it. You know, it can be at most 120. That's it. It's not millions of people. TV reaches millions of people, but not social media. So this is where we are right now, more or less.
And so you raised there the two avenues out of mainstream Turkish journalism, or what was mainstream Turkish journalism, which almost doesn't exist anymore, that people are having to turn to in order to practice proper journalism, which is social media and digital journalism, but also foreign outlets that are broadcasting Turkish, like Deutsche Welle Turkish, IPEC. I know that you are in the UK at the moment, unless I'm mistaken.
I'm in Turkey.
You're in Turkey. Sorry. Okay, but you have a strong link with the UK and with working in the UK and
Yes.
writing in the UK. What do you think? Do you think that there is a possibility now still at this period in this kind of political landscape for Turkish journalists to survive? How do you put it?
You mean right now, currently?
Yes, and in the years running up to 2023. I mean, how do you see the future of Turkish journalism?
Mm-hmm. To be honest, I'm not very optimistic about the future of Turkish journalism because of obvious reasons. All my colleagues have mentioned. Kadri Gu has mentioned about the structure of Turkish journalism right now. And Nevs also mentioned that the crazy preachers are on TV and the real journalists are on social media right now. Right now, the scenery is really bad. You know, I'm sure most of our viewers, most of the participants already know that the Turkish mainstream media, like 90% of the mainstream media is under the control of the government right now. So under these circumstances, it's very difficult to do quality journalism in Turkey. And yes, there are several independent media outlets, several independent websites and newspapers, but their budget is very, very low. And as mentioned, as Nevs said, journalism is, news production is an expensive business. You can always go on YouTube and make comments and reveal your opinions as a journalist to your viewers, but it's not the same thing as producing a real news story. So first of all, doing professional journalism in Turkey has become quite difficult right now under these circumstances. And these independent newspapers that I'm talking about they have very low circulation. They have a very low impact on the public opinion as well. And for the future, I think I want to believe that it's not always going to be like this. But right now, unfortunately, especially for a while, there is a new generation of journalists, professional journalists coming from the bottom. Unfortunately, we cannot talk about this anymore. Why? Because there is nowhere left that they can learn the journalism. Because, you know, journalism, yes, you go to school, you get a university degree, but you learn these practices of journalism basically at work. So right now, all the norms, all the journalistic norms at the newsrooms are wrong norms. They're ethically not ethical. They are not ethical. They are not professional. So it's very difficult for young journalists to learn the practices of this profession.
Let me on that point, İpek, let me bring in Aylin Sener, because she represents exactly what you were talking about there, the new young generation of journalists who want to come in through the profession and hopefully provide some kind of change and hope for the Turkish media. Aylin, you are still studying communication at Galatasaray University. What do you see as, is there a hope for you in the world which you are going to enter, the world of Turkish journalism? And as a young journalism student, what possibilities are there for you to work in a media outlet that you believe does an honest and an impartial job?
Of course, we have so many doubts and concerns about our future. When I talk to my friends about it, they all say the same thing. But on the other hand, we are not totally hopeless, because we can see the change in the new media outlets, and we are the generation who will create the landscape in the future of journalism. And also, we can see the opportunities which digital media brought us. And at this point, maybe we can say that the journalism, the definition of the journalism and its dynamics change as well. And we are trying to do, we will try to do something different than the conventional media. So yes, maybe there is not the conventional, the journalism which we knew before, but there are people, there are students and younger journalists report stories in another ways, in more interactive ways, or at least we should encourage ourselves to do it. But of course, I'm sorry.
No, sorry, finish, please.
Well, the curriculum is the main issue at the universities. So it is not adapted to new media, digital media. It is, but I can see that our professors are trying so hard to adapt it. But of course, our resources are quite limited in a public school. And you cannot change a curriculum that quick. It is not that easy in academia. So it is very hard, but there are things which we can do at universities, which I wanted a lot, that our professors encourage us to learn new technologies, and also maybe they can link us to network the media professionals.
I mean, I suppose the fear is for people who are trying to start new media outlets, as you talk about, you know, new channels on YouTube, new digital media outlets. Are these people just going to end up in prison or closed down, or with investigations for supporting terrorism? I mean, is there a belief that new outlets can be started, which can be impartial and not fearful of consequences?
Well, from my point of view, I don't think that's negative, actually. Well, this is not our first concern, I guess, because, well, this is the end of the road. I mean, not the end, but from the beginning, we are, as students, think about finding a job, getting a job, and how to start this job. But getting into prison is not our first concern, I guess. So I'm not that hopeless, actually, about it.
All right, we are getting a couple of questions coming in on the Q&A tab, so please keep coming in with your questions, either through clicking on the Q&A on the bottom of the Zoom panel and typing them there, or on the chat. Let me just go to the first question that has come in from Orhan Şener, who asks, what does the Western media need to do so as not to fall into the same traps that the Turkish media could not prevent? What he's put in a little background there, talking about how Western media seem to underestimate or underrate the authoritarian motives of Mr. Erdogan up until about 2010, believing that the media in Turkey had a negative bias towards the AK Party, the governing party. And today, the Western media, especially in the US and Britain, is facing the same criticism about the media being the coastal elite versus the public represented by Donald Trump and Boris Johnson. So a question to, let me ask Nevs that, because you are working now in the Western media, principally with Deutsche Welle, I suppose. I mean, Western media owned, let's say, even though operating in Turkey. Are you sensing the same kinds of challenges among foreign media outlets, among Western media outlets, as there were as there have been in Turkish media, in terms of the kind of polarization and in terms of let's say an underestimation of the views of Western media?
First of all, I was working for Deutsche Welle up until recently. Now we are establishing a new TV channel, hopefully in Turkey, Turkish one, and so I'll be working for them soon. Anyways, but like, did the Western media underestimate Tayyip Erdogan in the very beginning, or did people did not understand his authoritarian motives? Do you know what? I don't really know about that, because a lot of time has passed and a lot has happened. Back then, AK Party was a different party. And I mean, there are different causes for that. For example, maybe if this 2008 crisis did not happen, because after the crisis, United States Federal Bank started delivering dollars for a very cheap price to the markets. And right after that, all these authoritarian leaning leaders had really made use of that, like Erdogan in Hungary, Poland, the same story. So there are different causes. But the thing is, the formula is simple. If you're a journalist, you have to do journalism. That's it. We have to report what's happening. Pretty much. That's it. I think maybe we should just keep the principles and keep producing in line of these principles. That's it. I mean, I think it's in that sense a simple answer.
But do you think that there was a sort of pro-Erdogan bias in the Western media in the early years, or indeed an underestimation of Mr. Erdogan in those first few years? I mean, notably, there were some international outlets, an American newspaper in particular, which is often quoted as being quite pro-Erdogan in its coverage, and now has slightly changed or has become more realistic, let's say, in its coverage.
Well, listen, there are two sides of the story. There are two sides to the story. I mean, Kadri Bey knows better, but as far as I remember, there was AK Party and Erdogan. They were back then. They were internationalists. They were pro-EU. They wanted to join the EU. They wanted to be a part of the world system, whatnot. And against that, there was CHP, basically the main opposition party, who was basically an isolationist. And back then they had the third world discourse. They were against the EU, they were against NATO. Basically, they were pro-Russia and China. I mean, that was the case. I mean, let's put it bluntly. So, I mean, I'm not really accusing Western media of back then in 2002 being kind of more sympathetic to Erdogan and AK Party, because as I said, it was a different AK Party back then, and it was a different Turkey back then. It was different conditions.
Yeah, okay. We've got a second question that's come in from André de Munter from the European Parliament, who asks, as non-crazy people and genuine journalists who predominantly resort to the social media, how do you think the new social media law could or will further affect your work and possibilities? Just a little bit of background on that. That is the new social media law that was passed in July this year, indeed, that regulates, in the words of the government, will regulate social media. So all social media companies must now have a representative in Turkey All their data must be stored in Turkey. Their complaints must be addressed within 48 hours. And the Turkish government reserves the right to issue fines of up to $700,000 or block 90% of the bandwidth for failing to comply. This in a country which leads the world in requests to Twitter to have content removed, and is being seen, of course, by opponents as being an attempt to tighten control over social media. İpek, you talked a little bit about social media and how Turkish journalists are having to work in more digital ways and through social media to get their voices out. How do you think the new social media law will affect your work and affect the work of Turkish journalists?
Obviously, it will have a really negative impact on the work of social journalists who are working through social media, who are using social media in order to send their message to the public. It will also have a negative impact on, I think, the international social media companies as well, like, for instance, like Twitter, because they will have to have a representative here. And the main reason for this is because just in case Turkish government wants to see someone whom, for instance, they can file a lawsuit against it. So they want to see a human in front of them, whom they can maybe negotiate the terms. So, and not only that, the other regulations which are coming with the new social media law are really limiting the independent line of the media websites, because as I have said before, right now the independent media is mostly using internet in Turkey. There are mostly independent websites. For instance, it's very difficult to talk about independent newspaper anymore, except a couple of left-wing newspapers. But there are many independent websites that people get news from, including me. However, with this new social media regulation, they will also have to censor themselves. There will be a self-censorship in these independent websites as well. So in the mainstream media, we know that there's a wide self-censorship, and we all work under these conditions, including me. However, the internet media was a kind of a breathing place for us, or also for the Turkish audience and Turkish readers. Because, as I said before, it was the only independent area left. However, with this new regulation, I'm afraid there will be a widespread censorship over the internet media as well.
On that issue of self-censorship, I mean, Aylin, for example, when you are, you talked a lot about your friends and your colleagues, resorting to social media. I mean, do you feel that you have to self-censor what you write now on Twitter or on Facebook, particularly in light of the new social media law?
Yeah, of course, we are very careful about what we write on Twitter, but actually, I didn't think about so much about this new regulation, but of course, it will have a negative impact on us, but maybe it also, it can open new sources for us to spread news, or maybe we can find new ways to spread the news, or creating new platforms for us. I don't know, maybe the newsletters are quite important, and maybe from now people can understand that journalism is not that easy and news are not that reachable. It is, you have to put an effort to find it, and maybe they can start to pay for news.
Mm-hmm. Kadri, I want to put the next question to you, because you, as not only in your role as a Turkish journalist, but also in your role with the IPI, we've had an anonymous attendee ask a question. Do please keep posting your questions on the Q&A part of this chat, or indeed of this discussion, or indeed on the chat box. An anonymous attendee says, "Thank you all so much for your efforts and courage. It means a lot, especially at a time like this. I just wonder how we can actively help. I'm a Turkish citizen based in Istanbul, very much interested in freedom of speech and freedom of the press. I've been trying to reach out to organizations somehow involved who work in this area, but I've seen no response. So please tell us, the public, how to get seriously involved to protect independent journalism and journalists in Turkey. In your view, how can the voice and how can the ambition to protect what is left of the free and independent press in Turkey be supported?
Yeah, it's a very good point, because the missing point in respect with the discussion is the readership, the lack of interest of readership. This has been I think, the big problem since the establishment of the Turkish press. From the very beginning, the wrong perception of journalism and journalists as politicians using media tools to pursue a policy really undermined and is undermining our efforts regarding or in defense of independent media and journalism. So solidarity is must not be only in between journalists and networks of comradeship of international groups of press freedom advocacy, but it must also be in between readership and viewers and journalists, because they have to subscribe to independent news outlets. They have to support independent newspapers by buying them physically, or by subscribing them, or if they have the need or will, they should donate. They should actively engage in campaigns of donation campaigns, and I think, and they have also talk about the importance of independent journalism, how independent journalism is important for their sake, not for the sake of journalists, for the sake of democracy, for the sake of the citizens of this country, because uninformed citizens cannot participate into the democratic life and cannot generate the political will or energy to transform this country into the good direction. And we don't have quite enough time. As you mentioned, the social media law is now entering into effect, and this will empower the government, or maybe I have to use the term of regime. It's a new stop, or it's a new chapter in its evolution from competitive authoritarian to full authoritarian. Well, we have to aware that this will be a full stop, because under a full authoritarian regime there will be no room for independent journalism nor legal opposition. So yes.
You talked there, Kadri, about the need to actually consume and to read papers that are trying to provide an impartial view of Turkey. I mean, I was always struck in Turkey by the small numbers, the low numbers of readership of the newspapers. I mean, that when I was living there, the most read newspaper I think was Hürriyet, but it was just a kind of couple of 100,000, and then the numbers are sort of artificially inflated by dumping huge packs of newspapers in companies and things. I mean, I suppose that the question is, how do you attract more viewers or how do you attract more readers when these outlets like Hürriyet, for example, are being taken over, and actually the desire for or the choice available now for people in terms of newspapers is in terms of impartial newspapers is so small. I mean, many Turks who I met were simply, they'd had enough of reading the news because they were just getting the government viewpoint.
Well, look, the major problem here is the lack of the mainstream media. There is no such a media in Turkey. The mainstream, requires to have some basic qualities, and the mainstream media does not exist anymore. There was a handicapped, flawed mainstream media until the March 2018, when they were forcefully transferred by being bought by a crony group close to government. I refer to Demirören Media Group, which has taken over Doğan Group from Hürriyet from Doğan Group, and then this was the end of the mainstream media. So I think the readership should interact with the independent news outlets, with the independent media, by lowering their expectations. Good days are over. There's no financial support, or there is no there is, given the advertisement embargoes which are imposed on independent media outlets, there can be no enough resources to for a quality broadcasting, for a quality reporting. So I think the readership has to come into terms with the reality, and should support independent media without having high expectations, because this is crucial. If the independent media goes away, the remnants of independent media goes away, a very important pillar of a democracy, inextricable pillar of a democracy, will cease to exist. And if we will have a chance in the midterm or near future to reestablish a sort of democracy in this country, we won't have journalists to employ, because the chain will be broken. Now we are,
The person who asked that question has just said sorry, they didn't mean to ask a question anonymously. It is Beryl Marie Dumont. So thank you, Beryl, for that question. We've got about half an hour or so left. So I want to get through another couple of questions. But before I do that, I'd like to ask, how has the coronavirus pandemic affected the media environment in terms of government attempts to get its message out, in terms of opposition attempts to uncover the truth from the pandemic? Nevshin, can I ask you? Maybe I'll start with you on that. I mean, have you seen a change in the media landscape through the coronavirus pandemic in Turkey?
Well, yeah, good question, because nearly everybody, like the rest of the world, is talking about it, how the coronavirus is shaping media and etc. I mean, as Kadri has been mentioning, mainstream media is heavily under control anyway. So one thing in the beginning of the pandemic, health minister was coming in front of cameras. He did something interesting though. He had pressers every day, and he let to these pressers members of the opposition media also. Like, for example, he let Sözcü and Cumhuriyet be in the room and ask him questions. So that was a nuisance in that sense. And that had a positive outcome for the health minister, because we saw actually his approval ratings were like skyrocketing, because he seemed impartial and honest, basically. That shows us maybe something that Turkish people are yearning for, objectivity and transparency in that sense. Maybe we can see as a sign of this. But as things start getting worse, now we don't see health minister as much, and the information is not being handed out to the press. Rather than journalists, actually, we have a doctors' union. Doctors' union or the syndicate of doctors had been quite, active in sharing I'd say, alternative information about the corona pandemic. And that's why actually they're under attack from MHP leader Devlet Bahçeli. And obviously we see the same pattern. So the mainstream media or the conventional media is just giving the information that the government is sharing. On the other hand, alternative media, free press on social media is sharing the information given by the syndicate of doctors, for example. That's
what has happened to journalists who have suggested that perhaps the numbers being given in terms of cases and deaths is questionable?
Well, I mean, not the journalists, but as I said, the syndicate of doctors is under attack. So MHP is a part of the power mechanism in Turkey. They are in some sort of a coalition with AK Party, and the leader of MHP came up and said the syndicate of doctors is a nest for Marxists and it should be closed down, for example. Yeah, that's what it is. I think that the thing is, the government at this point, they know that the social media, I mean, or in the free press in social media is not that effective. They just reach to, I don't know, like 2%, 3% of the society, and those people are the ones who are not going to vote for the government anyway. So at this point, I think they just don't care as long as nothing is reported on the TV screen, because TV screen is very important for the government. That's my observation, because AK Party and MHP voters are watching TV, basically. They're not on YouTube or Twitter as much. They are, but not as much. So what's being said on TV is important. Or, you know, on these little internet sites here and there, somebody says something on YouTube, basically they don't care because it doesn't reach that many people.
Okay. I'm going to turn to another question from Azra Ceylan, who asks, how do different financial models impact the independence of media outlets in Turkey, and what opportunities are there for media outlets to have funding besides international organizations? İpek, you talked about the importance of the European Union and international support. What in your view, what are the financial support mechanisms that independent media can have within Turkey?
Sorry, actually it was Nevşin who mentioned about the importance of European Union and other international financial mechanisms, but I can also talk about this. Of course, I agree with my colleague that the independent international organizations funding for independent Turkish media proved to be very important in this process that we have been going through. For instance, a lot of independent websites were founded with these funds coming from European Union. One of the most successful independent websites called Medyascope, for instance, in Turkey. I think they also got some help from the international funds. So in this process, we have witnessed that it's really important for Turkish media. But at the same time, I think it is also as important as getting funds to have really, let's say, courageous businessmen who are willing to build new independent media companies, new independent media outlets. It's not easy. We saw that it's not easy when the Doğan news company, when Doğan company was forced to sell Hürriyet, CNN Channel D to a pro-government businessman, Demirören, 2 years ago. He was basically forced to sell his company. It's not easy in Turkey. However, I still believe that there is still some room, at least for some impartial journalism. And we need, I think, courageous businessmen who are willing to do this in Turkey.
Which is hard to find, I know.
Yeah.
Aylin, I'm interested whether we talked a little bit. We talked about social media and digital media and the options that there are for young journalists such as yourself to to develop new outlets, but also there are quite a lot of young journalists who are trying to get into foreign media, such as Deutsche Welle Turkish, BBC Turkish as well, the Independent in Turkish, or indeed to move abroad. Are you sensing among many of your friends and colleagues at journalism faculty that is the feeling that actually there is no room for you guys within the Turkish media landscape, domestic Turkish media landscape, and that you would either move abroad or indeed work for a foreign media outlet?
Well, unfortunately, they are not that willing work for Turkish media outlets, because it is not just for they are suppressed and they are under pressure out there, but they also see that when they do their internship or something in a news outlet based in Turkey, they see that well, they do not make reporting, they do not writing a news story. Mostly they are copying and pasting the other news. So that happens a lot, and this is not something motivating, and this is not what they have expected while studying journalism, or that wasn't their ideal. So besides being independent, besides having the right to do what you want to do, you can create a qualified work at BBC or Deutsche Welle. You do not have to publish a story in an hour. You can have a day to create it and to cover the subject from upside down. So unfortunately, yes, we mostly want to work for foreign news outlets, or they plan to go abroad, but still we'll see.
I mean, the fear, of course, for some Turkish nationals working for foreign media outlets, as we have seen from attacks on these people over the years, is that in a sense they are kind of a thorn in the side of the Turkish government, because the Turkish government believes they can control them because they're Turkish nationals, but of course they're working for an international media outlet, so they can't control them. So, for example, I remember my colleague Selin Girit from BBC Turkish being heavily attacked, and President Erdogan labelled her part of a conspiracy against her own country. Amberin Zaman, who worked for The Economist, President Erdogan called her a shameless militant disguised under the name of a journalist. So, of course, there is, I mean, have those of you who have worked for, or I mean, you all now are internationally known journalists. I mean, have you encountered an added level of hostility because you are seen as somehow betraying the Turkish nation by what you do? Kadri, for example, through your work in IPI?
Well, look, the so-called mission is accomplished. So such threats, such imprisonments of journalists from the mainstream happen mostly during the process of overtaking of the mainstream and the destroying the mainstream media. So, in order to divide the audience into echo chambers. Okay, so dividing the readers or the viewers into echo chambers gave the government a comfort zone to follow, to endure its policy of polarization, and as the society is polarized and the conservative section is identifying itself with the political power, so this would have helped to the government to gain some sustainability. So I think the pressure on independent journalists has turned into a way of fulfilling the policy. And now I think it's the first stage is accomplished, is over. Now there is no room to seize in order to control the media, etc. Now arrestation or imprisonment of journalists are actually done according to the daily needs of the government policies, and since 2018, the media landscape is always almost the same. There are some, some popping up small media companies there or there, here or there, but I think the Putinesque model of media is established. Although unsustainable, although inefficient, it is there, and the only aim of harassing journalists, threatening journalists right now is just, the creating a chilling effect, creating a threatening atmosphere in order to control the political class, in order to control the remnants of independent journalists. That's why I mentioned that the character and the will and the dedication is very important right now, as the landscape has more or less stabilized in negative terms.
Nevs and İpek, have you encountered any particular added hostility from your work with foreign media outlets being labelled some kind of traitor, or how have you felt personally threatened?
Nevs, you go first.
Well, I wasn't personally. I mean, I don't remember. I get threatened once in a while. It's normal. I mean, it's like daily thing. But the thing is, if you guys remember, we had this CETA report last year. CETA is a think tank, pro-government think tank, financed, subtly by the government. So they had a really inclusive, large report about people working in foreign media and foreign media outlets in Turkey, and basically like every journalist working for foreign media were finger pointed, blacklisted, and the actions of foreign media in Turkey were described as hostile, basically. So I mean, I think it's a prime example.
For me, to be honest, when I was working for international media, I was not living in Turkey. I was living in UK, as you mentioned. And therefore, I haven't received any threats because of my work with the foreign media, because I was not living in Turkey back then. But I have a lot of colleagues who work for foreign media in Turkey, I mean Turkish colleagues, and they receive all kinds of threats. Including being labeled as a spy, for instance. If you're a journalist, impartial professional journalist working for, let's say, I'm just giving an example, if you're working for BBC, and if BBC has a coverage which is critical of Turkish government that day, they can easily label you as a spy, for instance, because you're working for BBC.
Yeah,
so we have these kind of things a lot.
I got enough of those labels myself, non-Turkish national, and I'm full of admiration for all of you brave enough to receive those threats in a much more vitriolic and also more dangerous way, it being your country. We're kind of getting towards the end, but I just want to get in a couple more questions if I can. First of all, from Alexander Kolarich, who's posted this on the chat section of the debate. Some of the large cities in Turkey, he says, were taken by opposition parties, as I'm informed. Of course, Istanbul and Ankara, two of the most notable ones in municipal elections. Is there a change in funding of local radio and TV stations since that happened? I don't know who's best placed to answer that, actually, in terms of who knows about the funding of local media outlets? Kadri,
yes, there is. Although beginning with Istanbul municipality, greater metropolitan municipality, although they have given the impression that they are willing to support the independent media in the first place, now we see that this does not happen. There is
does that not happen?
Exceptional. There can be some exceptionals, but there is no.
I was just going to say,
institution. This is not institutionalized.
I was going to say, is that not happening because it's being blocked at a governmental level, at a national level by the government?
Not at all. Not at all. But municipalities do support locally some media endeavors, some media outlets. But these are individual and isolated facts. Mm-hmm. There is no, transparent or institutionalized kind of a support. Well, this support is more or less on a clientelist base, you know what I mean? But I'm not here to criticize them because any kind of support to the independent local or nationwide media is a good thing, whatsoever be the reason behind.
And as well as those in local TV and radio channels, of course, there have been a lot of new channels starting up, and Banu Güven, an illustrious journalist herself, of course, has sent a question in on the Q&A to ask, for example, Olay TV, where Nevsin, that's the channel that you've already started up or you're now working on. Sözcü TV, for example, is apparently starting Tele 1, Halk TV, and Banu asks, what are the chances for these new channels to survive until the next elections? Nevsin, what do you think?
Good question. I mean, I hope it's like a good chance. I mean, for example, Olay TV is now kind of co-owned by a young businessman. He's really young and he was in textiles business, and because since Turkish lira lost a lot of value, he says he actually gained a lot of money because of this, because he's exporting stuff. He made a lot of money and he wants to be in the media business. I mean, the thing is, Turkey has a young population and people are engaged and involved in media. Actually, it's a good medium to invest money in. But I think, honestly, frankly, some people who are trying to invest on new TV channels, I think their expectation is that the government is going to change soon. I think this is what this is their analysis, and this is why they're trying to invest in new TV channels, because otherwise it's not rational at all, obviously.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. Aylin, would some of these new TV channels be, for example, places? I mean, are your other students at the university? Are you discussing these new TV channels like Olay and Sözcü TV as potential places for you to find employment?
Well, of course, there are great opportunities and they are a new way for us to improve ourselves, or maybe some places to get in. But actually, before these developments, we haven't thinking about being on TV. I can talk about me and my close friends. Actually, we haven't thinking about being on TV and being broadcasting online. So we are mostly in digital media and writing platforms. So as they are quite new developments, we haven't discussed actually.
Okay, well, we're coming towards the end. I mean, there's one question from which I feel a bit like an imposter answering a question that you guys are probably much better to. You've provided much more stimulating answers to questions throughout this. But Emre Kizilkaya has asked me, because I'm now the Southern Europe correspondent based in Rome, and I was based in Greece and the Balkans before Turkey. So he asks, how do I compare Turkey with other countries, including Greece and Italy, regarding their media outlets and news consumers? I would have to say that, of course, Turkey is the most extreme example of oppression of freedom of the media and freedom of speech in any country that I've ever worked in. And I've been based in Serbia, Greece, Turkey, and now Italy. And it is, there are problems in media freedom in all of those countries, and growing increasingly so, particularly in Serbia. But you simply do not see the kind of blanket oppression and imprisonment of journalists as you do in Turkey. And of course, from Greece and Italy, they're both the European Union countries, and so they are encouraged to abide by some standards in terms of freedom of the media. and freedom of speech. And I have to say that I miss Turkey in many, many ways, and I miss my wonderful 5 years there. But it is a breath of fresh air, and also a burden lifted from my shoulders, that I feel that I can actually write here, report here on what is happening, and not feel that I have got the government calling me an enemy and putting me on the front pages of pro-government newspapers being called a traitor who should be captured and deported. So that I do not miss. And you know, these are slightly flawed democracies in many ways, but you know, we just have to hope that somehow the Turkish media environment comes back into a better direction than it is now. I think that unless we have any other questions that have come through, I don't think at the moment we do. I think we will probably wrap that up there after just over an hour. So I would like to thank all our wonderful panelists, Kadri, Nevs, İpek, and Aylin, for answering your questions, for being so engaged in this debate, and for being so brave in what you all do, and in Aylin's case, what you want to do, because I think that hearing your hope and hearing your desire to still enter the Turkish journalist sphere, I think fills us all with hope as well, that people like you will be able to breathe fresh life into Turkish journalism, and which is of course what we all want. And I suppose, first of all, second of all, of course, a big thank you to IPI for hosting this, to Oliver, to Renan, to all your colleagues there for hosting such an important discussion. I remember when President Erdogan said in 2015, "Nowhere in the world is the press freer than it is in Turkey." I'm very sure of myself when I say this. We all know that that is sadly not the case, but I have the utmost admiration and respect for all of you telling these stories and reporting in the most honest and most impartial, most courageous way than you can. And I suppose at a time when the world is more polarized than we can remember, and when there is a lot of darkness in terms of the eradication of democracies, we are not enemies of the people. We are doing a noble job, those of us who believe in a free, impartial media, and those of us determined to carry that out. And I wish you all the very best of luck, everybody who is listening to this and supporting the freedom of the media in Turkey and elsewhere. And thank you all for listening, and çok teşekkür ederim.